Emily Carter stood at the edge of the boot camp, the cold wind biting at her face as she took in the vast, unforgiving landscape before her. The sun was barely up, but the ground was already alive with the sound of marching boots and shouted orders. Around her, hundreds of recruits were moving with practiced precision, their faces hardened by months of training. She was different. The only woman in her group, young and untested. From the moment she arrived, she felt the weight of the stares, some curious, some skeptical, and many openly dismissive. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. "She won't last a week," someone muttered. Another voice laughed. "What's she doing here? This isn't a place for girls." Emily could hear every word, but she refused to let it break her. She squared her shoulders and pushed forward, determined to prove them all wrong. The first day was brutal. The instructors wasted no time separating the strong from the weak. Emily's body was pushed to its limits. Her lungs burned during the runs, her muscles screamed during the obstacle course, and her hands blistered from climbing ropes. But the hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was the constant barrage of judgment. The men around her were relentless. When she stumbled during a drill, snickers rippled through the ranks. "Careful, Carter. You don't want to slow us down," one said with a cruel grin. Another called out, "Maybe the general's son shouldn't have a weak protector." Emily's heart clenched, but she held her ground. Inside, she felt like screaming, but she swallowed the words and focused on her breathing. She reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't just fighting to survive boot camp. She was fighting for respect, for a chance to serve her country alongside her comrades. As the day wore on, the exhaustion settled deep into her bones. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the recruits like a relentless taskmaster. Sweat dripped from Emily's brow as she struggled through the final drill, a timed run through a muddy field with heavy gear strapped to her back. She felt the sting of mud in her eyes and the ache in her legs, but she refused to give up. When she crossed the finish line, gasping for air, the silence that greeted her was deafening. No cheers, no encouragement, only cold stares. At night, when the camp was quiet and the stars blanketed the sky, Emily lay awake in her bunk. Doubts crept in, whispering that she wasn't cut out for this life. But she pushed them aside. She thought of her family, her hometown, and the promise she had made to herself, to never give up, no matter what. Tomorrow, she would train harder. Tomorrow, she would prove that strength comes in many forms. The next morning brought no relief. The same faces watched her every move, waiting for her to fail. During weapons training, her hands trembled as she aimed her rifle. The instructors barked orders, impatient and unforgiving. A recruit nearby sneered, "She's too slow. Maybe they should send her home." Emily clenched her jaw, forcing herself to steady her breathing. She knew she couldn't control their opinions, but she could control her actions. Despite the challenges, Emily found moments of quiet determination. During breaks, she studied the manuals and memorized tactics. She stayed after drills to practice, even when her muscles begged for rest. Slowly, her body began to adapt. Her runs became less labored, her aim steadier. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. One evening, as the camp settled into uneasy silence, a few recruits approached her tent. To her surprise, they offered a nod of respect. "You're tougher than we thought," one admitted quietly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind Emily that every soldier's journey was different. Some battles were fought with fists and weapons, others with grit and heart. Emily's resolve hardened like steel. She knew the path ahead would be filled with hardship and doubt, but she was ready, not just to survive boot camp, but to become the soldier she had dreamed of being. They could mock her now, but she would show them all. When the time came, she would rise, and no one would forget her name. The sun rose again over the camp, casting long shadows across the training ground. Emily felt the sting of yesterday's exhaustion still clinging to her muscles, but she refused to let it slow her down. She could still hear the sneers and whispers, the doubt that clung to her like a second skin. Today, the stakes felt higher. She was no longer just fighting the drills. She was fighting for every moment she took a breath in that harsh place. The morning started with the dreaded obstacle course. It was a brutal test of endurance and willpower, designed to weed out the weak and reward the strong. Emily's legs trembled as she hoisted herself over the towering walls, her fingers raw and bleeding from gripping the rough wood. Around her, recruits surged ahead, their movements sharp and practiced. Some glanced back at her with thinly veiled impatience. "Come on, Carter, keep up," one barked, his voice sharp like a whip. Emily's chest tightened with frustration, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Every step was agony. She stumbled once, almost falling into the muddy pit below. A few recruits laughed openly. "This is why she's going home," someone sneered. The words stabbed at her pride, but she refused to surrender. By the time she reached the end of the course, her breath was ragged, and her body screamed for relief. The instructors barely glanced her way, their faces cold and unsmiling. "Slow and weak," one muttered. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and wiped the dirt from her face. She knew the journey ahead was long, but she was determined to walk it, no matter how painful. Next came weapons training. Emily stood at the firing line, her rifle heavy in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she raised the weapon, aiming down the sights. The crack of gunfire echoed across the range, punctuated by the sharp commands of the drill sergeants. When her turn came, she squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted her, and her shots scattered around the target. "Focus," one sergeant snapped. "Do you want to get yourself or your team killed?" The harsh words felt like a blow, but Emily forced herself to breathe deeply. She reset, steadied her hands, and tried again. This time, her shots hit closer to the mark, but still not enough to satisfy the instructors. Behind her, someone muttered, maybe she should stick to paperwork. The insult was meant to cut deep, but Emily pushed it aside. She knew her strengths weren't always visible on the surface. That evening, exhaustion settled heavily on the camp. Emily's body ached in places she hadn't known could hurt. Still, she found a quiet corner near the barracks, pulling out her training manual by the dim light of a lantern. Her fingers traced the words as she read, memorizing tactics and protocols. This was where she found strength, in knowledge, in preparation. She promised herself she would use every tool at her disposal to prove she belonged. But the hardest battles were the ones fought inside her mind. Doubts crept in during moments of silence. Was she really cut out for this life? Could she overcome the endless judgment and physical toll? Every mocking glance and whispered joke lingered like a shadow. The weight of expectation pressed down, especially knowing she was not just any recruit. She was the one people talked about because of who she was supposed to protect, the general's son. One night, the camp buzzed with tension. Rumors spread about an upcoming field exercise that would test every recruit's skill under fire. Emily lay in her bunk, heart pounding. She knew this would be her chance to prove herself once and for all. She closed her eyes and pictured herself standing tall, unshaken by fear or doubt. The next day arrived with heavy clouds and a biting wind. The recruits were called to formation, the air thick with anticipation. Emily looked around at the faces, some still skeptical, others quietly hopeful. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. This was her moment to show what she was truly made of. The pain, the ridicule, the long nights, they all led to this. Failure was no longer an option. As the instructors outlined the exercise, Emily listened carefully, her mind sharp and focused. She would face fire, smoke, and danger. But she had trained for this, physically, mentally, emotionally. The path ahead was uncertain and perilous, but one thing was clear. Emily Carter was ready to fight, not just to survive, but to become the soldier she had always dreamed of being. The sky was heavy with dark clouds as the recruits gathered for the field exercise. The air smelled of damp earth and anticipation. Emily stood among them, her heart pounding not from fear, but from a fierce determination she had never felt before. Today wasn't just another drill. Today was the test that would either break her or prove that she belonged. The commanding officer's voice cut through the tension. This exercise simulates an ambush. Stay alert. Protect your teammates. Complete the mission. The recruits nodded, some exchanging nervous glances. Emily's gaze hardened. She knew this was where she could no longer be invisible. They moved out in squads, weapons ready, senses sharp. The forest around them was thick and unforgiving. Branches clawed at their uniforms, and the ground was slick with mud. Suddenly, a loud explosion shattered the uneasy calm. The ground trembled beneath their feet as smoke billowed into the sky. The simulation had turned real, or so it seemed. Chaos erupted. Shouts filled the air as soldiers scattered, seeking cover. Emily's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Through the haze, she spotted movement. Lieutenant Jack Harper, the general's son, caught behind a burned-out vehicle. His uniform was torn, and blood stained his arm. He was trapped. Fear gripped Emily for a brief second. She knew the danger was real, the fire spreading fast. Bullets zipped past her, and the crackling of flames grew louder. Around her, some recruits froze, while others retreated to safer positions. But Emily's feet moved forward on their own. "Hang on, Lieutenant," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. She sprinted toward the wreckage, every step pushing her through the heat and danger. The fire cast eerie shadows on her determined face. When she reached Jack, she saw the pain etched across his features. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with shock. Emily dropped to her knees beside him. She could feel the heat of the flames licking at her skin. "I've got you," she whispered, gripping his arm tightly. Carefully, she assessed his injuries, a deep cut on his leg, but no broken bones. If she didn't get him out fast, the fire would consume them both. She looked around, calculating her next move. Bullets continued to whistle through the air. There was no time to wait for backup. With a grunt, she began dragging Jack away from the burning vehicle, using her body to shield him from the worst of the flames and debris. Sweat poured down her face as the acrid smoke burned her lungs, but she pushed on. Behind them, a series of smaller explosions rocked the area. Trees crashed down and the ground shook. Emily's vision blurred, but she refused to give in. The voices of doubt, the mocking laughter from Bootcamp, all vanished in the urgency of the moment. There was only one thing that mattered: saving this life. Finally, she reached a patch of safer ground. Gasping for air, she laid Jack down gently and tore a strip from her own uniform to tie a makeshift bandage around his leg. His eyes met hers, a flicker of gratitude shining through the pain. "Thank you," he managed to say, voice weak but sincere. The camp was silent, the usual noise replaced by stunned whispers. Emily felt the weight of every eye on her, the disbelief that the recruit they had mocked was the one who had risked everything. For the first time, respect edged into the air. As medics rushed over, Emily stayed by Jack's side, her hand steady despite the adrenaline fading. She glanced up and saw the general himself, his face grim as he approached. Their eyes met briefly, and Emily saw something she hadn't expected: a nod of approval. The day's chaos faded into memory, but Emily knew this moment would change everything. The girl who had been underestimated, mocked, and pushed to the edge had become the hero of the hour. And there was no turning back. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning rubber as Emily crouched behind the charred vehicle, shielding Lieutenant Jack Harper with her own body. The heat was unbearable, licking at her skin through the fabric of her uniform. Around them, the ground trembled from distant explosions, and the sharp crack of gunfire sliced through the chaos. Jack's breaths were shallow, his face pale beneath the grime and soot. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she pressed her body closer, trying to shield him from the worst of the flying debris and the relentless spray of bullets. The forest around them had turned into a war zone, trees splintered and blackened, smoke swirling in thick clouds that choked the air. Emily's mind raced, every second stretching into an eternity. She knew that if she didn't act fast, Jack wouldn't make it. The vehicle was burning, and with every passing moment, the flames edged closer to where they huddled. But moving was dangerous. Every inch she considered was riddled with enemy fire, or so it felt in the chaos of the moment. She whispered, "Stay with me, Jack. I'm not leaving you." Her voice was calm, but inside, adrenaline surged like storm. She couldn't afford to panic. Not now. The crackle of fire grew louder, the heat intensifying. Emily scanned their surroundings, searching for an escape route. To her right, a fallen tree trunk provided some cover, but it was a risky path. Bullets zipped past, some embedding in the ground mere inches away. She glanced at Jack. His eyes were half closed, pain etched deep into his features. He was trusting her to get him out alive. Without hesitation, Emily shifted her weight, pulling Jack behind the vehicle's wreckage toward the fallen tree. Her arms burned with effort as she dragged him, the sound of burning metal and snapping branches filling her ears. The smoke stung her eyes, making them water, but she refused to stop. Suddenly, a sharp whistle sliced through the air, a bullet grazing her shoulder. Pain flared, but Emily gritted her teeth and pushed forward. There was no time to think about the injury. Survival depended on every ounce of her focus and strength. They reached the fallen tree, and Emily quickly pressed Jack behind it, using her body to shield him from the worst of the gunfire. She ripped off part of her uniform, tearing it into strips to apply pressure to his bleeding leg. Her hands were steady despite the shaking inside. "You're going to be okay," she said firmly, though she wasn't sure if she fully believed it yet. Minutes dragged by, each one heavy with danger. Emily kept low, watching the fire creep closer. The camp's distant shouts and commands felt muffled through the thick smoke. She tried to ignore the burning in her lungs and the pounding in her chest. All that mattered was protecting Jack until help arrived. Suddenly, footsteps approached through the haze. Emily's heart leapt. Medics, finally. She signaled urgently, and they rushed forward, taking over care for Jack. Relief flooded her, but she didn't move immediately. She stayed low, still alert for any threat. One of the medics looked at her with wide eyes, recognizing the courage it took to get this close under fire. "You saved him," the medic said quietly, as if speaking louder might break the fragile calm. Emily nodded, exhaustion washing over her. The pain in her shoulder was sharp now, but secondary to the overwhelming sense of purpose she felt. Jack's breathing steadied, and for the first time since the explosion, Emily allowed herself a small breath of hope. As the medics prepared to move Jack to safety, Emily looked back toward the burning vehicle. The flames had consumed much of it, turning metal to molten ruin. The moment crystallized in her mind, the line between life and death, courage and fear. She knew the story of that day would ripple through the camp, changing how everyone saw her. The girl they mocked had stood her ground when it mattered most. And in doing so, she had saved a life. Emily finally allowed herself to lean back against the fallen tree, closing her eyes briefly. She was battered, burned, and bruised, but she was still standing. And deep inside, a fierce new strength had been born. The sun was sinking low behind the trees as Emily finally allowed herself to exhale. The fire had been contained, the chaos settling into uneasy silence. Around her, medics tended to Lieutenant Jack Harper, their faces grim but focused. Emily sat on the rough ground, her shoulder throbbing where the bullet had grazed her, but the pain was nothing compared to the flood of emotions washing over her. The other recruits gathered at a distance, their faces a myax of shock and awe. The whispers of mockery were gone, replaced by a hesitant respect. For weeks, Emily had been the target of sneers and whispered doubts, but today she had become something else, a soldier who had stood firm when the world was falling apart. Jack's eyes met hers as the medics prepared to move him to the infirmary. Despite the exhaustion and pain, a faint smile touched his lips. "You saved my life," he said quietly, the words carrying a weight that made Emily's heart beat faster. She nodded, trying to keep her own voice steady. "I promised I wouldn't leave you." The general appeared then, stepping through the smoky haze. His presence commanded immediate attention. His face was stern, but his eyes softened as they settled on Emily. "You showed courage today," he said, his voice low but firm. "More than most of the men here." The words felt like a salve on wounds deeper than any physical injury. Emily stood, every muscle aching, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Thank you, sir," she replied. There was no hint of arrogance in her voice, only quiet determination. This moment was bigger than any award or praise. It was the first time she felt truly seen for who she was. That night, back in her bunk, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a vivid dream. The fire, the smoke, the rush of adrenaline, the fear, but also the unexpected calm, the moments when everything slowed down and all she could focus on was saving a life. The camp was different now. Where there had once been doubt, now there was a flicker of respect. A few recruits approached her quietly, offering nods or brief words of encouragement. It wasn't much, but to Emily, it meant the world. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming part of the team. The days that followed were grueling as always. Boot camp never eased up, and Emily pushed herself harder than ever. Her body still bore the marks of that day, the grazed shoulder, the bruises from a fall. But inside, something had shifted. The girl who had once felt invisible was now a force to be reckoned with. In training, she moved with a new confidence. Her runs were faster, her aim steadier. The instructors began to take notice, their criticisms tempered with grudging approval. Emily wasn't perfect, but she was relentless. Every failure was a lesson, every challenge an opportunity. One afternoon, during a weapons drill, Emily found herself side by side with Jack Harper. He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and something softer, respect. "You saved me back there," he said quietly. "I owe you." Emily shook her head with a tired smile. "We all owe each other out here," she replied. "That's what makes us strong." Their bond grew quietly but surely, built on shared experience and unspoken understanding. Emily wasn't just the recruit who had saved the general's son. She was becoming someone people trusted. And that trust fueled her in ways she never expected. Boot camp was far from over, but Emily faced each day with a new kind of strength. The mocking voices faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of purpose and resolve. She knew the road ahead would still be hard. There would be more tests, more moments when doubt tried to creep back in. But Emily Carter was ready. She had fought through fire and smoke, proven her worth under impossible pressure. The girl who had once been mocked was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. And when her time came, she would stand tall, not just as a soldier, but as a hero. The days following the fire seemed to pass in a blur of drills, orders, and endless physical strain. Emily moved through the camp like a shadow, quiet, focused, and unyielding. The whispers of her bravery had spread, but she paid them little mind. What mattered was the work ahead, the countless hours of training that would forge her into the soldier she was determined to become. Each morning began before dawn. The cold bit through her uniform as she pushed herself through grueling runs, obstacle courses, and weapons training. Her grazed shoulder throbbed with every movement, a constant reminder of the battle she had survived. But the pain fueled her rather than slowed her down. She was no longer the recruit they doubted. She was a force, tested and tempered by fire. The camp was changing too. The men who once sneered now offered nods of acknowledgement. Some, who had mocked her openly, now fought for the chance to train alongside her. Emily noticed the shift, but never let it distract her. Respect was earned in sweat and blood, not words. One afternoon, during a tactical exercise, Emily found herself leading a small squad through dense woodland. Her orders were clear: navigate to a designated point while avoiding enemy detection. The squad was a mix of recruits, some experienced, some new, but all looking to her for guidance. Emily's heart beat steady as she moved forward, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. The forest was thick, shadows stretching long as the sun dipped lower. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt through the squad. Emily's voice was low but firm, issuing commands with precision. Stay alert. Move slow. Watch your corners. She glanced back to ensure no one was falling behind. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed ahead, a patrol team. Emily froze, signaling the squad to halt. The tension was palpable. They held their breath as the enemy soldiers passed within feet, unaware of the group hiding in the underbrush. Emily's hands clenched into fists. Moments like these were what Bootcamp had prepared her for, the fine line between success and failure, life and death. As the patrol moved on, Emily led her squad deeper into the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, but beneath it was a silent danger. The terrain was unfamiliar, and the weight of their gear pressed down on every muscle. Still, Emily moved with steady determination, knowing their success depended on her focus. When they finally reached the target location, relief washed over the squad. Emily allowed herself a brief smile, but the mission wasn't over. The return journey was just as perilous, and she kept her squad tight, eyes scanning every shadow. Back at camp, word of Emily's leadership during the exercise spread quickly. The instructors took note, praising her tactical thinking and calm under pressure. For the first time, she felt the heavy cloak of doubt lift, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. That evening, as Emily sat alone near the mess hall, Jack Harper approached. His arm was still in a sling, but his eyes were sharp, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You did good today," he said simply. "I don't think many could have led like that." Emily shrugged, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I'm just doing my job." But inside, the compliment meant more than she let on. Jack settled beside her, and for a moment, the world of drills and orders faded away. They talked quietly about their dreams, the fears they kept hidden beneath their uniforms. Emily shared her hope of proving herself, not just as the general's son's protector, but as a soldier in her own right. Jack listened intently, his respect evident. "You're stronger than anyone here realizes," he said, "including yourself." The days grew shorter As fall crept over the camp, Emily's body ached from the relentless training, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She had faced fire, bullets, and doubt, and had emerged not just unbroken, but unshakable. In those moments, beneath the fading light and whispering trees, Emily knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The cold morning air bit into Emily's skin as she laced up her boots, the chill pulling her fully awake. Today was different. There was a new energy humming beneath the surface of the camp, a quiet buzz of anticipation. Rumors had spread that a surprise inspection was coming, the kind that could make or break a recruit's future. Every step felt heavier, every breath deeper, but Emily welcomed the challenge. This was her chance to prove she belonged, not just to herself, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. As she moved toward the training field, the camp was already alive with activity. Soldiers ran drills, shouted orders, and checked their gear with meticulous precision. Emily's heart pounded in sync with the steady rhythm of boots on gravel. She reminded herself that this wasn't just about physical strength or skill, it was about focus, resilience, and heart. The commanding officer arrived, his face unreadable as he scanned the assembled recruits. His gaze lingered on Emily for a moment longer than she expected, and something in his eyes shifted. Maybe it was recognition, or maybe respect. Either way, it fueled her determination. The inspection began with a series of rigorous tests: physical endurance, marksmanship, tactical knowledge. Emily tackled each one with a calm she didn't fully feel, pushing through fatigue and doubt. The fire for months of training burned bright inside her, propelling her forward even when her body begged for mercy. During the shooting range test, Emily's hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Each shot hit closer to the bullseye than the last. The instructors murmured among themselves, their earlier skepticism giving way to reluctant approval. Emily didn't let herself smile yet. Not until the final whistle. Next came a written exam, testing their knowledge of strategy, protocol, and survival skills. Emily's pen moved quickly across the paper, every answer a reflection of the hours she had spent studying late into the night. She thought of the promises she had made to herself, to never give up, to keep pushing no matter how hard it got. Then came the most daunting part, a simulated combat scenario that tested their ability to react under pressure. The recruits were dropped into a mock battlefield filled with noise, smoke, and confusion. Emily's squad was tasked with securing a hostage. No one knew who, but the tension was real. Every sound, every movement had to be sharp, precise. Emily's heart pounded as they navigated the course, communicating in whispers and hand signals. Suddenly, a cry for help pierced the air. A simulated casualty was caught in an exposed position. Without hesitation, Emily darted forward, weaving through gunfire and debris to reach the injured soldier. She applied first aid with practiced hands, her mind razor-sharp despite the chaos. When the exercise ended, silence fell over the field. The commanding officer stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the recruits. Then a nod. "Outstanding performance," he said, his voice carrying authority, particularly from Private Carter. A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the crowd. Emily's cheeks flushed, but she held her head high. This was more than just recognition. It was a turning point. Later, as the camp quieted under the soft glow of dusk, Emily found herself alone near the training grounds. The weight of the day settled over her, a mix of relief and pride. She thought about how far she'd come, from the girl mocked at boot camp to the soldier who now stood tall in the face of every challenge. Jack Harper approached quietly, leaning against a nearby tree. "You did good today," he said simply, eyes warm with genuine respect. "You earned every bit of that praise." Emily smiled, feeling the last traces of doubt slip away. "Thanks, Jack." "It's been a long road." He nodded. "And it's not over yet. But whatever comes next, you're ready." The camp lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the ground. Emily looked up at the stars emerging overhead, steady and unwavering. She knew there would be more battles ahead, both on the field and within herself, but she was no longer afraid, because she had learned what it truly meant to fight, not just with strength, but with courage, with heart, and with the unbreakable will to never give up. The morning sun filtered through the barracks windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Emily sat quietly on her bunk, her fingers tracing the faint scars on her hands, a silent testament to everything she had endured. The months of relentless training, the mockery, the near-impossible challenges, it had all led to this moment. Today was graduation day, the day every recruit dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. Emily's heart beat steadily but fiercely, a quiet drum of anticipation and pride. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived weeks ago, unsure and doubted by everyone. She was a soldier now, forged by fire and trials, tested beyond what she ever thought possible. Outside, the camp buzzed with final preparations. Recruits polished their boots and adjusted their uniforms, their faces a blend of nerves and excitement. Families and officers gathered on the parade ground, waiting to witness the culmination of months of sacrifice. Emily stood in formation with her squad, the weight of her rifle familiar in her hands. Her gaze swept over the crowd until it settled on the general, his stern face softened by a proud smile. Beside him, Jack Harper stood tall, his arms still healing, but his spirit unmistakably strong. Their eyes met, and Emily felt a surge of warmth and gratitude. The commanding officer stepped forward, his voice ringing clear across the field. Today, we honor those who have proven their dedication, strength, and courage. Among you stands a soldier who faced doubt and danger with unwavering resolve. His words echoed in Emily's ears, each syllable affirming the journey she had fought through. As the ceremony proceeded, Emily's name was called. She stepped forward, every eye on her. The murmurs had shifted from disbelief to respect, their volume replaced by silence, filled with admiration. The general himself pinned a medal to her uniform, a symbol not just of achievement, but of transformation. "Private Emily Carter," the general announced, "you have shown exceptional bravery and leadership. Your actions have saved lives and inspired us all." Emily felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a warm embrace. She looked out at the sea of faces, friends, mentors, and the very people who had once doubted her. She no longer saw mockery in their eyes, only respect. After the ceremony, Emily found herself surrounded by congratulatory handshakes and smiles. Jack approached, his voice low but sincere. "You've earned this, Emily. Not because of who you saved, but because of who you are." She smiled, the tension finally breaking. "Thank you, Jack. I couldn't have done it without you." The camp quieted as evening fell, the once chaotic grounds now peaceful under a blanket of stars. Emily stood alone for a moment, breathing deeply. The path ahead was still uncertain. There would be new battles, new challenges. But she was ready. Every trial, every moment of doubt had prepared her for this. She thought back to the day of the fire, to the fear and determination that had driven her to shield a wounded officer behind a burning vehicle. That moment had been the turning point, the spark that ignited a fire within her. Now, as a soldier fully embraced by her comrades, Emily knew one thing with absolute certainty. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to face it head on, to rise each time you fall, and to keep moving forward no matter what. With the medal gleaming on her chest and the future stretching out before her, Emily stepped forward into a new chapter. not just as the girl who saved the general's son, but as a hero in her own right.